Hello. The City of Newport News operating budget for the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, 2011 is now complete. This is my report to the citizens about how our budget changed from the time it was originally recommended on March 22nd until the final City Council vote on May 10th. I'm going to describe the process in three basic components. First, I want to just broadly characterize the budget. Secondly, I want to talk about a few of the highlights, the major investments and the major changes in the budget that was just approved as compared to previous budgets. And then I want to talk just a little bit about some things we need to be thinking about as we move beyond next year's operating budget and into the future in terms of the city's fiscal position. I'm pleased that the final vote of the City Council on the various ordinances to enact the budget were for the most part consistent with the major recommendations I had presented to the City Council and the citizens in the original recommended operating budget. There were, of course, changes during the 7-week period where my budget recommendation was before the Council and the public. On a broad level, what we were dealing with this budget was the fact that our two single largest sources of local revenue, the real estate tax and transfers from the Commonwealth of Virginia, were both projected to be down again next fiscal year. This puts a real strain on the staff trying to come up with a recommended budget and achieving the many priorities and responding to the various pressures that we have in an operating budget when your two largest revenue sources are going down. On the upside, many of the other smaller local revenue sources are increasing modestly toward the end of the current fiscal year, and we're able to project some increased growth for next year. Things like the machinery and tool tax and the personal property tax in particular have been trending in a positive direction. On the expenditure side, we had a few major objectives that we wanted to achieve in the budget as it was recommended and also as it was adopted by City Council. We wanted to hold the line on real estate taxes. We needed to deal with the fact that energy prices have gone up substantially, and we needed to budget for additional funds for gasoline and diesel fuel for the city's vehicle operations. We had to deal with ever-increasing costs in health care for our employees. We had a commitment to continue to make the necessary increases in investment in our pension fund to protect the long-term viability of the pension fund. Wanted very much to increase our investment in the Newport News Public Schools within the constraints of our budget. And after 3 years without a general salary increase, we very much wanted to have some wage increase for the city's workforce. And the recommended budget and the adopted budget achieved those 5 broad thrusts. And I'm very gratified with the support and the understanding we received from our citizens, from our employees, and the City Council in those decisions. Now let's talk just a little bit about some of the changes that the City Council made in the budget during that 7-week period while it was under consideration. Of course, the one that probably got the most publicity was the restoration of the bookmobile. The final approved budget restored $100,000 of funding for the bookmobile. That was $20,000 less than what is in the current budget, and I was directed to work with the library staff to find a way to run the bookmobile with greater efficiency. Other changes in the budget mainly had to do with information that came in and technical adjustments that were made because of revenue estimates, a better understanding of what the state had done, and technical corrections. Keep in mind that our all sources budget, including all the special funds and the money that we passed through the schools, ended up being approximately $748 million. So even with an excellent effort by the staff and the recommended budget during those 7 weeks, many small adjustments were necessary. Things like more precise estimates of what the action of the State General Assembly meant for things like funding of constitutional officers, public safety, emergency management. Another one that was probably pretty apparent to everyone in Newport News was from the time of the recommended budget in March to the time of the May adopted budget, price of gasoline went up quite dramatically. And while we had anticipated that to some degree in the original budget, the City Council, and I certainly agreed with them, believed that it was prudent to increase the amount of money in the budget by several $100,000 to cover the growing cost of fuel. So hopefully we've got that item properly covered at this point. On the expenditure side, in addition to gasoline, there were some healthcare cost adjustments, and there were some small changes in various line items. But really, in that area, the restoration of the bookmobile was probably the single most significant change. I want to now talk about the actual approvals, the ordinances that were put in place to create the budget that we'll be living with for the fiscal year starting July 1st. We did raise the cigarette tax from 65 cents to 75 cents per pack. That generates about $500,000. And of course, in a budget of our size, one could say that that money was used for many different things. But I would point out that that's about the amount of revenue we believe we're going to lose because of the referendum, which requires cities to offer full real estate tax abatement for veterans that are qualified as 100% disabled. Another way you could look at that is it is very close to the cost of staffing the new fire station, and it was an important incremental piece of revenue is the point. The Waterworks water rates was adopted as a separate ordinance, as it traditionally is, and for the average citizen or business, you will experience that in much the same way you have in the past, and that is a small incremental increase. And we try to run the Waterworks like a private utility and not skip a couple years and then have a great big increase, but have small ones each year that are more manageable for people. But there was a philosophical shift in our water rates this year, which you will see next year and continuing in the years after. Specifically, we did away with the summer rate program, and we are beginning a shift so that a higher percentage of your bill reflects the fixed costs of the pipes and the meters, and a lower percentage of your bill reflects the actual flow of water. This is more consistent with the actual cost structure of running the water utility in the modern era, and we're going to see this change through over the next several years, get to a point where we're not expending reserves and we're operating on a break-even basis and running the waterworks like a business. But again, to the average consumer, it will be experienced much as it has been in previous years. It was also necessary to raise the solid waste fee by a small amount. This was to protect the integrity of our solid waste fund, which funds your trash collection, your bulk waste collection, and supports our very extensive recycling effort. This change will amount to a little bit over $14 a year. Now, as part of that, as an efficiency, we are also going from every week bulk solid waste collection to every other week. You can anticipate public information from the city and Public Works about this change, but the way that will work is we will be asking you to put out your bulk waste in the same week that you put out your recycling. The city employees are receiving a 2% general wage increase, and council adopted the ordinance that puts that in place effective July 1st. And there were several other ordinances necessary to comprehensively enact the budget, including, for example, the appropriation of both local and state money for the Newport News public school system. I want to now turn to some longer-term thoughts as we reflect on what our fiscal situation will be in the future and some of the things we need to be thinking about going into the operating budget in FY 12-13 and beyond. As I mentioned in my memo to City Council with the recommended operating budget and also in the earlier Newport News TV program on the budget, it's important to think about the long-term fiscal environment the city faces and not only focus on the arithmetic of the budget that we've put in place for the next fiscal year. To that end, one of the initiatives that I recommended, and I was pleased that City Council supported, was a modification in our program to provide tax relief for elderly and disabled related to real estate. It was my recommendation, and it was approved by City Council, that we phase out the real estate tax abatement program while maintaining the tax deferral program. This means that all of the same eligibility requirements will apply, but after July 1st, 2012, if you qualify for the program, your taxes can be deferred until the time you sell your property if you otherwise qualify, but they cannot be dispensed with entirely. Well, this is a difficult recommendation, and I recognize that it will affect people. I believe it is the fiscally responsible thing to do. We need to think about equity for all of our taxpayers, and this program, which started 15 years ago with a very small effect for very few people, has grown to a $3.5 million hole in our operating budget and is projected over the next 10 years to grow to $7 million. So by going to a deferral program over the next several years, we will gradually begin to reclaim that tax revenue, which will translate into what is equivalent to approximately 5 cents on the tax rate, which will put us in a position several years from now to either avoid a tax increase or perhaps be in a position to consider a tax decrease. Of course, many other factors will have to be considered between now and then, but this is a responsible long-term action, and I appreciate everyone's understanding and support in doing the right thing with regard to this action. I mentioned before some of the other longer-term things we need to consider, and one of those is the cost of health care for our employees and retirees. We do have a program to provide health insurance for our employees and retirees. We're making every effort to sustain that program, but I do want to caution that until we fully understand the impact of health care reform and what changes may come to that, there is some doubt in my mind as to how these benefits will be sustained in coming years, and that's something we're going to have to take a hard look at going forward. One of the trends that we're dealing with in this city is the aging workforce. We have an excellent workforce, but we have many, many baby boomers who will be retiring in the next few years. And the city organization needs to be extremely mindful of retaining and recruiting excellent new employees and making sure that the institutional knowledge and expertise of our current workforce is forwarded to the next generation of employees that is now entering the workforce. And this is something that we will be very thoughtful about and as we consider operating budgets in the future. I am pleased that both in the arithmetic of this operating budget, but also looking to the future, we were able to put in the startup money for the Stony Run Community Center, which is now under construction, and for the 311 system, which within a couple years we hope will allow our citizens to enjoy a comprehensive one-stop call-in and email referral system for citizen information. So these things, that the groundwork has been laid in this budget, and we'll need to fully fund those in next year's budget. Finally, I would end with the connection between our operating budget and our strategic priorities. You may have separately heard us discuss the Strategic 8, and this operating budget begins to align our our yearly spending plan with those priorities, and as the various reports and work of those initiatives advances, look for additional changes in our operating budget and our capital budget to ensure that we're making investments that coincide with those priorities. Let me just close with a few summary points about the operating budget that Council has approved for the fiscal year beginning July 1st. As I mentioned when I described the recommended budget, public safety was a great emphasis in this operating budget, and all of my recommendations in that area, including reducing the number of vacancies in the police department and hiring additional firefighter paramedics, was in the budget as it was adopted by City Council. I'm very pleased with that. The citizen input process on our budget I thought was very positive this year. You know, we had our recommended budget out before the public longer than most other communities, as I mentioned, for about 7 weeks, and I think that gave everyone ample time to review our proposals, see our television shows, check online, see the material, come to the public hearings, and based on the experience we had this year, it would be my intention to continue with a similar process next year. If you are interested in the details of the operating budget that was approved by City Council and how it might vary from the recommended budget, we're in the process of putting all those final details together. Before July 1st, we will have on the city's website the approved operating budget as well as summary material from my transmittal to City Council that describes the particular changes that were made from the time of the recommended budget to the time of the approved budget. Also, once the production is complete, we will have a hard copy of the approved budget available in our Newport News public libraries. I thank you very much for your attentiveness to the operating budget process for the fiscal year that begins July 1st, 2011 and ends June 30th, 2012. And I hope you found this information useful. Thank you very much.